Everybody, welcome all our Torah Anytime viewers, listeners, subscribers, and wherever else you're listening to these classes. Especially welcome to all our Zoom listeners, watchers. I don't even know how to classify fellow humans, which again, I don't even know if we could classify as that. Anyways, so I don't even know where to begin for the introduction for this class. So first of all, Pesach is coming up, so crazy, no? Like, I know women go crazy over Pesach because of the cleaning, so it gets like crazy in that way. But I'm talking about crazy in a different way, crazy in there is like huge amount of spiritual potential on Pesach. And that being said, 2 years ago, we started a series called The Secret Story, The Secret of the Plagues, or something along those lines. And we did a plague a week, and we got a makkah a week, and we did the third makkah lice. And last year, the plan was that I was going to continue what I started 2 years ago. But unfortunately, the plague of COVID hit us, and I sort of rerouted that, and I thought it was more appropriate to speak about the topics that I spoke about last year for that reasons. So I generally do not like to leave, classes or series unclosed. So we've had, 2 years ago, we're sort of continuing a series that we've started 2 years ago. That being said, it is, I would strongly recommend to listen to those classes 2 years ago. It was called The Secret of the Plagues. I'm pretty sure that's what it was called. And there was 4 classes. There was an introduction, and then there was 3 classes, 1 class for each plague, for Dam Tzvadei Akinim, so blood, frogs, and lice. Each had its own separate class. The concept in general about, just to understand why not even why, there's 2 biblical mitzvot on the Seder night. Number 1 is eating matzah. Number 2 is recounting the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. You have to recount the story of the Exodus of Egypt. So we went, I think it was 3 years ago, when we went through the whole series, with the whole story through a series on the hidden story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, which I strongly recommend, again, people to listen to. This is nice that someone listens to it once. People generally hear about this topic, be like, oh, this topic, I already know about it. I don't need to learn about it. That's wrong on every account, but especially on the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, because literally the mitzvah is to recount the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Now, if it was true that once you say, oh, I know the story already, it's okay, let's move on to a different topic, then we wouldn't be having this mitzvah every single year, because as soon as you check this mitzvah one time, you're good, you know the story already. But rather, it is important, imperative, and very, very particular that we understand this mitzvah. We recount the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim to the level that we are able to. And how do we get to a level of where we should be is by preparing for it, like you prepare for anything in life. So with that being said, I strongly recommend people to prepare for for the Seder that's coming up. Men, women, and children, the mitzvah over here is the same. Generally speaking, when children come to, especially children that went to yeshiva, when they come to the Seder, they start telling over the parent. It's the mitzvah is v'higata levincha. You should tell over to your children. Unfortunately, now it got switched around. V'higata leavicha. Now you tell over the parents. Now the children are over there and telling over the parents exactly what they learned in school, which is great, by the way, and they should do that. But there is a mitzvah also that the father and the mother should go and tell over the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim to the children. And how are you going to tell it over if you don't know? And this is something that I said before. And by the way, what I plan on doing is, because we did it 2 years ago, I want to give a brief introduction of an introduction that we already gave 2 years ago. So there's going to be a very short, just overlap, just so that we're all on the same page for all those who didn't listen to those previous classes. So when you have the kids come over to the table, you have to go and entertain them. And I gotta say, about me or my kids, I'm speaking only for my family, like, if you're going to be starting telling the deep Dvar Torah with all the numerical values, and you're going to bring down the Arizal, the Zohar, and any other Kabbalist master that you know, and you're going to plug it in, and you're going to go over there, and you're going to go to levels that you've never experienced before, the kids are going to be going like, huh? what's going on? I mean, you'll probably, well, not you, because you know what you're saying, but everybody else will be going, nobody knows what's going on. Sometimes people go too deep, and nobody knows what they're saying. Sometimes people go too deep, and even they themselves don't know what they're saying. But that's a different story in its entirety. The idea is that you have to go and educate the children in this night. And that's why my method has been for the past few years, is that wherever I am for the Seder night, if someone asks me to say something, and generally that happens in many places where I go, I say, let other people speak during this time, during the time where everyone's speaking in the Seder. When it comes to the meal, that's when I speak. That's when everyone's eating. I go and I have a special book. I have to show it to you. Maybe next week or 2 weeks. I'll take it out. I have to show you. There's a special book that I use. It's a picture book on the 10 makos. And during the meal, usually what I do is I have wherever all the children, it's for sure my children, but any other children that are around the table all gather around while all the adults eat, and I go through the 10 makot. That's what I do. If I do the same set on the same place, so 5 makot one night, 5 makot another night, and we go through it. And we speak about all these different concepts, and it gauges the children, and it teaches the children, and I ask questions, and then what they remember from last year. And we go into an engaging manner. Why? Specifically the 10 makot. Why? Because this is something that's very, very, not only it's entertaining for the kids, but there are other reasons for it. And what are the reasons for it? So the questions that we have to ask as we begin this topic is, why specifically 10 makot did God go and give to the Egyptians? So we know that Paro denied the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He denied the existence of God. And the words that Paro used, Mi Hashem asher eshma b'kolo. Who is God that I should listen to his voice? Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen come over to Paro. And they say, let the Jewish people leave. And Paro says, why? Who said I should leave? He says, oh, God said that you should leave. So who is this God that I should listen to him? I've never heard about this God. So what Paro did is Paro denied the existence of God. Now, when Paro denied the existence of God, he denied the whole aspect, that God created the world, the whole existence of God's creation from its beginning to its end. Now, the world was created with 10 ma'amarot. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says, "Ba'asara ma'amarot nivra olam." With 10 sayings, the world was created. 10 sayings, again, this is 10 times God said something and it came to being. And you look in the beginning of Bereshit, when it says Vayomer Hashem, and Hashem said, that is one saying. So you look in the first chapter of Bereshit, you have 9 times where HaKadosh Baruch Hu says Vayomer, that is 9 sayings, and the 10th one is for Bereshit. Bereshit is also counted as a saying. So the world was created, the Mishnah tells us, in 10 sayings. Because Paro denied God who created the world in 10 sayings, God then went and gave the Paro 10 plagues, parallel to the 10 sayings that God created the world. The Chadush Harim brings it one step further and says, by the way, this you don't have to tell the children. The children are going to be, a lot of this concept, but just so that you understand how important this is. The Chadush Harim goes and says that there was 10 makot corresponding to the 10 ma'amarot, to the 10 sayings, and this was later transformed to the Asarat HaDibot, the 10 commandments. And I even saw somewhere, and I'm still looking for it, that you could even plug in another 10, which is a 10 test of Avraham. Meaning, which I have to look at that. That would be fascinating to do a class on that. I'm still, gathering, learning research on that. Meaning that there's 10 plagues corresponding to 10 sayings, corresponding to the 10 commandments, corresponding to the 10 tests of Abraham Avinu. But anyways, the way the Or Gedaliah goes and explains this is that when God said another utterance, another saying by the creation, which each saying sort of Hashem covered himself. Think of it as Hashem put a cloak, a coat over himself and hid himself. And when he was finished, so the first saying he put on one covering, second saying he put on another covering, and so on and so forth. By the time HaKadosh Baruch Hu finished creating the world, it was 10 coverings over HaKadosh Baruch Hu, meaning that if you were to look into the world, you would not be able to see God. Now, the 10 makot, each of the 10 makot, what God did was God revealed himself one makah after another makah. God took over one cloak after another cloak, revealing himself, showing his existence to the world. Now, the way to understand this is that if you put on 10 coats, so which coat are you taking off first? you're taking off the 10th coat first, right? If you put on 10 coats, the first one that's coming off is the 10th. The next one that you're coming off is the 9th, and so on and so forth. So this is the way that it corresponds to the Ma'amorot, to the sayings, versus to the plagues. The 9th Makkah, the easiest one to explain, is corresponding to the second saying, second Vayomer, which is what? Vayomer Hashem Yehi Or, let there be light. What is the 9th Makkah? Darkness. That's the night that, and God removes the darkness. You have also the 10th Makkah, which is corresponding to Bereshit Bara Elokim. This is that God created the world. What is the 10th Makkah? 10th Makkah is Makat Bechorot. Makat Bechorot is the killing of the firstborn. So when God went and killed the firstborn, he didn't send an angel. It says, Ani hu v'lo acher. Only God himself went, because Bereshit Bara Elokim, only God himself created the world. God himself went and did Makat Bechorot. So the entire way that it worked is that there was 10 coverings from the 10 sayings. Then there was the 10 plagues which remove each of these coverings. And once you remove the coverings, now we could start with the Aseret HaDibot, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am Hashem your God, now because that corresponds, to everything basically. If you didn't understand a word that I just said, don't worry, you'll get the rest. It's a little bit hard at the beginning, just bear with me. The purpose of the 10 plagues was not merely just to punish the Egyptians. The purpose was to demonstrate that God exists. As it says in Shemot, in Exodus chapter 8, verse 18, it says, Leman teida ke'ani Hashem b'kerev haaretz. That you should know that I am God in the midst of the earth. And the Ramban goes, Nachmanides goes, in Shemot chapter 31, verse 16, goes and it says, there are many different types of heretics. There are many different types of people that don't believe in Hashem to a certain level, each one into their own level. And the Ramban classifies them into 3 different categories. You have category number 1, that people that think that God didn't create the world. Category number 2, that maybe he did create the world, but they don't believe in divine providence. They don't believe that God intervenes into the world, meaning that he created the world, step back, and let the world with nature carry its course. Then there's a third category where they may believe that God created the world, and they may believe that God has divine providence, meaning that he intervenes in the world, but he doesn't have absolute power. He doesn't have the ability to change nature. So according to these types of heretics, people that don't believe in God to certain levels, the miracles of Egypt, of the Exodus, specifically speaking about the 10 Makot, these correspond to take out all of these disbeliefs or heretical ideas. The Malbim goes and says that you have 3 concepts, and then you have 3 sets of Makot. The Makot are separated into 3 sets. There is the first 3, then you have 4, 5, 6, then you have 7, 8, 9, 10, it's in its own category. So you have 3 till 9, and then 10th in its own category. The Malbim says the first set of 3, that those are its goal of those Makot is to go and prove the people that say that there is no such thing as a God. And that's why it says by Makat Dam, for example, in Exodus, in Shemot, chapter 7, verse 17, it says, Bizot teda kani Hashem. With this, you will know that I am God. What is with this you will know? Now you'll know that I am a God. Now God's sort of introducing himself. The second set of 3 shows that not only God exists, but God has the power and authority to control the world. By the way, we're starting on the second set of 3. That's what we're going to be starting on today. The second set of 3 is that God has direct involvement. Where do we see that this concept is being proven? So when you look at in Shemot, and what's actually Pashat Vayera, general, just so people understand, whoever's looking up sources, when I say Shemot or Exodus, I say the whole Sefer Shemot instead of going to specific parshiot. So in Exodus chapter 8, verse 19, if you want to look exact parsha, it's in Pashat Vayera. When it speaks about the wild beast, which is the topic that we're speaking about tonight, what does it say when Moshe warned Paro? In the name of Hashem, he said, "Lemachar yeh ha'ot hazeh." Tomorrow, this will be a sign. This sign will come. And also in Devel, it says, "Machar yaseh Hashem hadavar hazeh." In chapter 9, verse 5, it says tomorrow will happen. Why is it that God gave the message that's saying that tomorrow the plague is going to begin? Because right now, the purpose of these plagues is to show that God has control over the world, meaning that God could decide when exactly the plague will start, when it will end. So it says specifically tomorrow, not that it's just going to start now, because maybe you could say, okay, there's a special power that's going on, it's going to start around this time. So God put a specific time that it says tomorrow specifically. And this is why it says also in Shemot chapter 8, verse 18, Leman teda ke ani Hashem b'kerav haaretz. What is it saying over here? Now you're going to know that I'm in the midst of the land. What is the midst of the land? Says the Shlach HaKadosh. It's referring to that it shows that God is active with the laws of nature. God has the ability to manipulate the laws of nature. So that is the second category. If you're still lost, don't worry about it. Bear with me. The third set shows that God has absolute power. And this shows that how God defies nature. Hail and rain, for example, which is not hail and rain. Fire and water, which is in hail, which is rain, comes together. I'm a few steps, all over the place. Those who say that God is not all-powerful, God here shows that he's able to take two opposite extremes, two different elements that go and oppose each other, diametrically oppose each other, and put them together. Shows that God is also, could defy the laws of nature. So, we over here, we split it up into three groups. The first group of three Makot plagues, God created the world. The second group, that there is divine supervision. The third group is God has unlimited power. Another brief bit of an introduction is just so, if you're not familiar, the way that the plagues work is that not every plague of the 10 plagues did God go and give a warning to Paro. The way that it worked, it was warning, no warning. So 2 plagues there was a warning, 3rd plague there was no warning. Because that was lesson number 1. Then God went to lesson number 2. You don't warn more than twice. So God, the first lesson, when we were focusing on the lesson that God created the world, so Dam Tzvadea, there was warning, Kinim, no warning. Now there's a new lesson. Now there's a lesson, wild animals. Oh, wild animals and the epidemic with the animals' death. Those are plagues 4 and 5, warning. And then you have the blisters, no warning. Then you have hail and locusts, warning, darkness, no warning. The same method that it goes, because each one is teaching a different thing, and you don't warn more than twice. Okay. Oh, two final points. Number 1 is that the Makot lasted for a month. There's a question if there was a warning for a week, and that there was not a question. There's a difference of opinion. If the plagues lasted for a week and there was a warning for 3 weeks, or vice versa, the plagues lasted for 3 weeks and there was warning for 1 week. And the final point of the introduction is that when we're reading over these Makot, and we are, reading the destruction of Egyptians, there's a concept in the Torah that it says in Mishlei, in Proverbs, chapter 24, verse 17. Benefol ovecha al tismach. When your enemy falls, don't rejoice. Meaning that even though the Egyptians deserved the 10 plagues, and even though they deserved the suffering that was coming to them, it's still not something that we should be exalted by, feel happy about that. Happy was not a good word, but you shouldn't exalt. That was rejoice maybe is a better word. And this is why every time when we count the Makot, we drip out a little bit of wine. We drip out a little bit of wine. Wine denotes happiness, joy. So we remove a little bit of the wine each time when we're saying a Makah, because even though they deserved it and they needed to get what they were getting, it's still something that it's not something that we're like, aha, you got it in your face. I don't know Egyptian name. I was about to say Egyptian name, but I don't know Egyptian. Wow. What's the pharaoh's name? Oh my gosh, it's going to come in much later. Okay. Now it's bothering me. Okay, if anybody knows the Egyptian name, please post it in the comment, because this is going to drive me crazy. Oh my gosh, Pharisees? Oh my God, I don't know why it's going to do this. Anyways, okay. These are conversations that I should have in my mind, but I leave it. Ramses, thank you. Oh, thank you very much. When you have an itch, and there's a certain Gan Eden that you get when you scratch the itch, sometimes you have an itch in your brain. And that is where you want to say something, and you're like, what is the word that I'm looking for? And you can't do it. It's like an itch. But when you finally get that itch, and that itch was Ramses. So thank you, whoever it was that, I think it was Adalia. Thank you very much for sending that. It was going to bother me for a while. Okay, now that we've had my issues resolved, now we can come to the topic at hand. So now we're speaking about the 4th Makah, the 4th plague, and that is the plague of wild animals. I was about to say a very fun plague, but I can't say a very fun plague, but it's a very entertaining plague when you go and you learn about it. the utterance, the ma'amar, the vayomer that it corresponds to from the 10 sayings. This is corresponding to Genesis chapter 1, verse 24. It says, Vayomer Elokim, and God says, Totze ha'aretz nefesh chaya lemina. Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to its kind. Behema v'remesh v'chayato eretz limina v'hichen. Cattle, like creeping things, and the beasts of the earth should come out of its kind, and it was v'hichen, and it was so. Says the Maharal, this verse, this is what the corresponding to the wild animals, to Makkah number 4 is. So, the Makkah starts off with a warning. Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, by the way, now it's going to get a lot easier. Whoever was lost until now you could focus. That until now was fine. And by the way, if you were lost in what I said until now, except for my little craziness with Ramses, but besides that, if you were lost, I would strongly recommend to review the first class that we gave in this series, which was 2 years ago, which was the introduction to the secret of the plagues or something along those lines. Because that's really where I go into depth in this, and I think that really gives you a good understanding of how we're going to present this information. So the fourth Makkah starts off with a warning. Moshe Rabbeinu goes and warns Paro. Now, what you remember, what you don't remember, Paro pretended to be a god. And in order for him to be a god doesn't have bodily needs. So he made a very, very, very important rule in Egypt. No one's allowed to go out in the morning out of their house. Why? It doesn't matter. The god of Egypt, which is Paro, said so. And the reason that Paro did that is that he needed to go to the bathroom. But he can't show his peoples that he goes to the bathroom, because then it says, oh, wait a minute, you're going to the bathroom, then how are you a god? So what he did was early in the morning, he'd go into the Nile, and in the Nile, he would do his business, as they would say. Right? And that's where he was, took care of his, his business. Let's just leave it at that. Moshe Rabbeinu would go and confront him while he was doing his business. And Paro realized this because it happened previously in the previous plagues. So Paro changed his routine. He changed the time when he was going to go to the bathroom in the Nile. And Hashem goes over to Moshe Rabbeinu and tells him exactly what time and place Paro changed the location to be. He says, go warn him again over there. So Moshe Rabbeinu goes and he confronts Paro right when he's in the middle of tending to his bodily needs in the Nile River. And he comes in and he says, Paro, I have a message from God. And Paro's like, whoa, who's there? He's like, occupado, someone's in here. By the way, just as a side note, you ever realize that when you go into the bathroom and not you, somebody, because whatever, nobody goes to the bathroom and whatever, blah, blah, blah. Someone goes into the bathroom, knocks on a stall. Does the person say, I am in here? Never. It's the only place that people refer to themselves in third person. I'm not in here. Someone is in here. Like occupied. Who says occupied? Now, what is occupied? It became such a normal thing that airplanes put occupied on the bathroom doors. When do we speak like this? When do you go and imagine you're sitting and you're on a roller coaster and there's another guy that's trying to go and get onto the roller coaster. You're like, occupied? Be like, no, I'm sitting over here. Are you going to be like, someone's sitting over here? No, be like, excuse me, I'm sitting over here. So why is it, very good question, right? We have to understand this question. No, I'm kidding. Why is it when you knock on the bathroom door, they don't say, I am in here, someone is in here. I don't know who. Don't ask me, but someone's in this bathroom. Why is it? Because it's an embarrassing act that people have to do. It's a human act that people have to do. So it's embarrassing, so you don't want to say, I'm in here. You say, someone's in here. You say, occupied or occupado, depending on where you're located. And this idea sort of removes a little bit of embarrassment that you have. Paro, this is where Moshe gets to Paro, right where he's middle of it. Oh, you think you're a god? God says, I'm going to show you how godly you think you are. When you're in occupado territory, when you're in someone's in here, third person saying, that's when Moshe Rabbeinu is going to go and going to, let's call it, humble Paro. So Moshe Rabbeinu goes to Paro. Paro is trying to say, occupied, someone's in here, the god of whatever language that he was using. And Moshe Rabbeinu goes in and he says, the God of the Jews, he's like, wait, Paro stops him. He's like, wait, what are you doing? He says, can you see that I'm attending my needs over here? Like I'm doing my business. Apparently that's a word I'm going to continue using it now. He says, I'm in the middle of doing stuff over here. What can you wait? And Moshe Rabbeinu goes, wait a minute. He says, aren't you a god? Don't you tell your people you're a god? God does do business? And Paro says, listen, they believe whatever I tell them. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, whatever you tell them is fine, but I got a message from God. And God says that in exactly one day, tomorrow there's going to be, again remember, this is God showing that he's overruling the entire nature. So God's saying, tomorrow there is going to be a plague. What is the plague? Moshe Rabbeinu warns Paro. There's going to be a mixed group of wild animals, birds of prey and everything that's going to be coming, nothing like you have ever seen before, coming to Egypt. Unless you let the Jewish people go. If you let the Jewish people go, no plague. So Paro goes, he was in the middle of reading the Daily Nile, and he's like, I heard what you're saying, I'm in the middle of reading my horoscope, please leave, I need my privacy at this point in time. Puts his curtain back, or whatever it is that he had over there, floating, and he continues. He thought that he was done with it, but there was something very, very different that happened this makan than all other makot. Paro was in the Nile, doing his business. Every time I try to think of a different word, but I'm like, there's nothing better than doing your business. So he was doing his business, and God, and I'm going to try to make this as gentle as possible and as not as difficult to hear on the ears as possible. But he was going to the bathroom and he was pushing, and his intestines protruded outside from the let's just leave it like this. His insides came outsides, but the part that was supposed to stay inside came outside. And I think you follow me at this point in time. Now, if that wasn't painful enough, there was rats that came in from every direction. And rats have little sharp teeth. And with their little sharp teeth, they started doing a sort of liposuction on Paro's insides, which were now outsides. And Paro did not like that. It didn't feel so good. So he started screaming and shrieking like a little girl. And the Egyptians started hearing, someone screaming like a little girl, so they started, running out. By the way, the Metalshim doesn't say like a little girl. That was my own interpretation of it. He was just screaming. But in my mind, it was a little girl. So he starts screaming and shrieking on the top of his lungs. Everybody starts rushing out to the Nile, see what's the commotion about over here. And they see Paro doing his business with his insides on his outsides, and the rats eating his insides, which are on the outside. Okay, you get what I'm saying. Basically, it was not a good scene. And from this, Paro returned to his palace so humiliated, so downtrodden, that he turned his heart to be very, very stubborn. He hardened his heart and decided that he's not going to let the Jewish people go. So the plague began, and the plague came from there was wild animals that traveled across from all over the world, came to Egypt, and there was a sort of sudden migration of wild animals. One of the miracles was that they did not attack Goshen. They passed through the Jewish land of Goshen, but they did not attack anybody in Goshen. Now, even though the plague of blood and frogs also did not affect Goshen, but the Egyptians thought of this more like a coincidence, because the Egyptian land was surrounding the Nile. The Goshen was further out. So the plague of blood and frogs came from the Nile. So they figured the people that are surrounding it, those are the ones that are going to be affected. That's why it made sense that the Jews did not get affected by the plague of frogs to a certain extent, and blood, because they were further away. But the center, where the Nile was, everybody around it got affected. But over here, the animals were coming from all over the world. They were coming from all different directions, and they even passed through the Jewish land. They passed through Goshen, and still they did not harm, they did not touch, they did not bother any single Jew. The pasuk tells us furthermore, in Shemot chapter 8, verse 17, it said that when the wild animals passed through, it says, V'gam ha'adama asher heim alehem. The land that was under them also, it says, and also the land that was under them, meaning that there was something that changed upon the ground. So there's a few interpretations of this. Number one, what happened if, let's say, Egyptian was going on a cruise, right? They went abroad. And the place where the Egyptian went, the land of where the Egyptian went, even though they weren't in Egypt, they were also attacked by wild animals. Meaning it was sort of like a like a radar sensing, that the wild animals pinpointed exactly who's the Egyptian, regardless of whether the Egyptian was in Egypt or in South America or in the Caribbean bathing in the sun. Whatever it was, the animals went and pinpointed them. So the land, the land that they were on, meaning that wherever the Egyptians are, whichever land, that's where the wild animals came. But there's another interpretation. The Chavetz Chaim goes and says that Paro wasn't, when Moshe Rabbeinu said, listen, there's going to be wild animals that are going to come and attack you. So Paro wasn't so afraid about that, because you think about it one way. If it's going to be the local wild animals, the ones that we're aware of, we're familiar with, all right, we're not so worried about that. We know how to deal with those. But if it's wild animals that are from further away, then also we don't have so much to worry about it, because they're not in their native land. When an animal is not in their native land, they don't feel comfortable to attack. They feel very discombobulated. They're not acting like as if they're acting in their natural habitat. So we could deal with them also. So Paro in his mind was saying, okay, we could figure something out. It's not the biggest deal. So what happened was when the wild animals came from faraway lands, the land itself changed to make the animal feel comfortable wherever the animal was on. It changed the land, its texture, its climate, so that the animals would feel at home and would be able to feel free to attack as if they would have attacked if they would have been on their home ground, in their native soil. This also goes for weather. Some animals deal in the hot, some animals deal in the cold. So everything changed with them. Different types of climate would make, maybe they wouldn't attack. If, let's say, a polar bear would be too hot, maybe they wouldn't be able to go and attack. If you have things in the Sahara Desert that they come over into cold, maybe they won't attack. So the everything changed around it. Meaning that if you're able to picture this, and by the way, if you could use your imagination for the plagues, it's fascinating when you learn about all the midrashim. Meaning that you have a tiger from the African jungle, and then you have a polar bear from the far, the north region where they're more colder, are running side by side, and the land is also changing. The temperature is also changing. Things were something that it looked like you must have been like on some severe heavy medication in order to begin to comprehend what you're seeing over here. The change of weather also affected the surrounding area. So meaning that the Egyptians had cold, warm, hot, humid, dry, all these things back and forth. And what happens is when you change temperature back and forth, it's, people can get sick. And I know there's a thing that I know specifically with Russians, especially if they go to a sauna, a banya, whatever it is, they go from hot to cold very quickly. I don't remember the reason. And one in Russia once explained to me there's a reason behind it. But according to the nature of the body, it's not good to change drastically the temperature because it could cause you to get sick. Maybe in some certain senses it's fine. I don't know. Maybe it is. But in generally, when you're changing back and forth to different temperatures at two opposing ends, it's very bad for the body. And a lot of Egyptians got sick from that drastic change. You have also, furthermore, you have certain animals that they feel comfortable in closed spaces. You have other animals that need wide open areas. So the animals in the closed spaces would attack people in closed places, and the animals that needed wide open areas would attack people in the wide open areas. It was sort of something that there was no way that even if you had a group of wild animals run through, it would have been able to happen. This showed that there had to be some god, some being orchestrating everything from on top, changing the weather, changing the texture, changing the humidity level. There's so many aspects that need to be changed over here. But we learn over here a very important lesson, that in order for the animals to thrive in their own natural animalistic habits, they needed to feel comfortable. They needed to feel at home, and that's when they're able to excel at doing what they do best. So the lesson is also for children. That children, and really it's not only children, it's really adults also, that if you want to grow, if you want a child to grow, then a student has to be comfortable. If you want to grow, you have to be in a comfortable habitat. You have to feel that you're accepted. That you have to feel that you have the ability to open up. If you're feeling tense and nervous and insecure, you'll automatically withdraw, and you wouldn't be able to excel to be the best that you can be. Very important for children. Children have to feel accepted. They have to feel, liked. They have to feel that they are able to open, that they're able to grow. Because if not, they're going to close it and they're not going to be able to grow. So going back to the wild animals, you have over here the animals are coming in. And they're coming in from every area. You're having tropical rainforest animals are running side by side by things from the polar regions. And if you just could, picture this, you have lions and bears running next to hyenas and wolves, pigs and donkeys next to kangaroos and foxes, rats and mice next to snakes and scorpions, eagles next to owls, ostriches. You also have the mosquitoes, the bees, the hornets. You have so many. In fact, the skies were so filled with flying creatures that it darkened the skies. And the big kicker that came back was those pesky frogs, and those lice also came back again. They talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? After they just got over of their difficult plagues with the frogs and with the lice, now they too come back. The Maggid of Dubna goes and explains this in a mashal, that there was, in the olden days when you used to have a Jewish wedding, they used to have a separate table for the poor people that they would be able to enjoy the wedding and be able to it's a simcha for the whole town. So the poor people would come and they would have a meal. So there was one particular rich man that he didn't want the poor people to sort of, go off the style of the wedding. It was a very high style. So he decided he's going to make a special, misibah, special party for the poor people the day before the wedding. Think of it as a rehearsal dinner for the poor people. This way the poor people have the party and this, and then the real party is going to be the next day. So that's what happened. He made this party the day before the wedding, and all the poor people came. Then the next day, when the big wedding came in, he saw a bunch of poor people coming back in. He's like, I don't understand what's going on over here. He says, you had the party yesterday. And the poor people said, yeah, yesterday we came because we're poor. Today, we're coming because we're distant relatives. So we're coming not because we're poor. We're coming because we're distant relatives. So the frogs and the lice said, yeah, yesterday, last time we came, we had our own, makkah. But now, what do we do? We're part of the same group. We're part of the same animals. Of course, we're going to come back again. To think about it, after you get over something, like when somebody could be extremely, extremely scared of a bee, but they won't be scared of a wolf. Why? Because they had a bee once bit them in their eye, whatever it was, and it swelled up, and they were able to see into the future. It was just not whatever happened, and they were scared death to a bee, but they're not scared about the wolf. They never had to deal with it. So the frogs caused such a traumatic experience to the Egyptians, and now when they came, they could have seen a lion, but they saw the frog. They were like, no, Roger, who's the frog? Whatever it was, the frog from whatever, All right, here's the itch again. Somebody please help me. Hermit the frog, right? Thank you. Somebody, please. Okay. I don't know what's going on today. Whatever it was, the frog come back and they were like, no, Hermit is here. I can't believe it. Oh no, the lion I don't care about. So it caused them so much stress, so much traumatic, that it bothered them to such a high level, they couldn't comprehend, couldn't know what to do with themselves. So that's scary enough. To see the things that you just passed over. I'll tell you what's even more, in my opinion, what is even more scarier. That Hashem made it that you had those timid creatures, those animals that were very kind, very nice and fluffy, those animals that are just, you see them, you're like, oh, because you're a girl. Generally, guys would not do that. But whatever. You see them, you'll be like, oh, such a cute little whatever animal, a bunny, right? Such a cute little bunny. Oh, look at that cute, pure white bunny. And what God did is that God made these timid creatures, let's use the word ferocious, towards it. So you have this cute bunny that all of a sudden has like sharp claws, sharp teeth. It's like drooling and growling. Has like these dangerous eyes. In fact, it has like a scar across its eye. It's battle wounds. He's got like, scars across his chest. His muscles from the little bunny is popping out. He's got a few tattoos of eye drops going down from all the people he killed. He's got a tattoo of mom on his arm. Like real tough guy. And he's coming over there and you see this little bunny that looks like that. In my mind, that takes the cake. Like that, that's scary. Like the lion, yeah, I know the lion. but why is this buddy doing pull-ups right now and doing sit-ups? Like, what's going on over here? I think he's injecting steroids as I am looking at it. Like, what is going on? You have this little, timid, cute creature that all of a sudden became ferocious. So it wasn't just like wild animals came in and bears and tigers and bears, oh my, or whatever, came in and they were like, I'm going to eat you. No. It was like from all angles. It was psychological warfare at this point. From all angles, it was coming in, crashing into them. The Egyptians discovered, though, that if they barricade themselves into their homes, nobody's going to be able to come in. They are going to be able to prevent the wild animals from coming in. So what happened is that Hashem caused a sea monster. From the explanations of the Torah, it seems like it was something like a giant squid that came up with. It had numerous, very large arms, and it came out of the Nile. And what had happened is that it started going on the roofs of the Egyptians and started ripping off the roofs, or pulling its arms in through the top floor and going down to the bottom and opening the doors. It was basically opening up anything that the Egyptians barricaded. But while this giant sea monster is ripping up their homes, the snakes, the scorpions, the insects realized that they can't get into the Egyptians' home, and they had a target acquired, that the target is in the home, so they started burrowing under the ground. So they have over here, which if you could just picture the scene, is you have, a huge tentacle just like going in your house, opening doors, and at the same point in time, you see like, a little snake starting to come out from under the ground over there, and then you look at another corner and there's a rat, and then you have another corner, there's a frog, and then you have the fluffy bunny, is coming in with all its tattoos and its gang members with chains and knives. It's coming in over there. There was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to run, nowhere for them to go. The animals settled in, and initially, you think the attack is it's great, but the plague lasted for a while. So what happened was when the animals went to sleep in the day, then all of a sudden the night animals woke up. And then the night animals, meaning that it didn't give the Egyptians any rest. It was around the clock. And the Egyptians started begging the Jews, please help us. They wanted to go home. They wanted to barricade themselves. They said, walk with us. They went to the Jews, walk with us. They knew in the plague of the blood that if I buy something from you, I'll be saved. So they told the Egyptians, if you walk next to me, maybe I'll be saved. So the Egyptians walked next to the Jews, but the animals had such good sensing that they were able to know who was Egyptian, who was a Jew, and the animals hurt the Egyptians and didn't bother the Jews at all. Talk about going to a safari, right? Forget about being in a jeep. You're walking over there and the lion is right next to you and it doesn't touch you. Can there be a bigger miracle that you're walking over there, the lion is attacking the person to your right, the person to your left, but doesn't even look twice at you? Doesn't even, to the point that the Jews weren't scared of the animals. The Jews were also in charge of taking care of the children, the Egyptian children. And the Egyptian didn't say, hey, take care of one child. They gave them a bunch of children. It says, go take care of all these children. And it'll be very, very difficult. And the animals came, and one monkey grabbed this child, another bear grabbed this child. And when the Jews get back with all the children, there's none of the children left. The Egyptians are where the children are. Be like, what can I tell you? The bear got that one, the lion got that one, the tiger got that one, the ostrich grabbed this one, the crocodile grabbed this one. None of them is left. None of them is left anymore. The animals, as they were going through the land, they also destroyed the land. Besides the trampling, we know that the temperature changed it. So the temperature also ruined the land itself. So the crops were getting ruined. The people's houses were getting ruined. People were dying during this plague. Now we have to figure out what is the measure. Everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does is midah keneged midah. Everything that God does is measure for measure. So what did the Egyptians do to deserve the wild animals? So there's many, many reasons. We're going to go through all of them, B'ezrat Hashem. Number one, the Egyptians behaved like wild animals. You behave like wild animals? Here, let me send you some wild animals. Also, number two, the Egyptians went and they forced the Jewish people to capture wild beasts for their sporting, they had sporting events with wild animals. So they go to the Jew and say, hey, by the way, go catch me a tiger. Go to the Jew, go catch me a crocodile. And they would take these crocs and the tigers, and they would use them either for avodah zarah, idolatrous rituals, or in sporting events. But the Jews, when they tried to go and capture these things, many of them died at the hands of the crocodiles or the tigers or whatever it is that they needed to capture. So measure for measure, you send the Jewish people to go and deal with wild animals. Now the wild animals are going to come and deal with you. They also The Egyptians, number 3, the Egyptians forced the Jewish laborers to go and tend to their animals. It says, oh, you want the Jewish people to go and work for your animals? Now the God's animal is going to come and they're going to work for you, on you, better yet. Number 4, the Egyptians were very immoral and promiscuous people. And because of that, there was a lot of adultery that was going on, and the lineage was mixed. So because of that, midah keneged midah, there was a mixed group of animals. It wasn't just one particular, it wasn't just lions that came. It was a mixed group specifically because the Egyptians mixed amongst themselves. Also, the next one is the Egyptians wanted to dilute the genealogy of the Jewish people. And this is what they tried doing by killing the males. They wanted to kill all the males so they would be able to marry the females, and this way sort of dilute the Jewish population. So also, midah keneged midah, you wanted to dilute, you wanted to mix and match over here. God mixed and matched all the wild animals. Furthermore, the next one is that the Egyptians sent through the Jewish babies into the sea and into the wildlife, and unfortunately, things happen. So because of that, you wanted the Jewish children to be devoured by animals. Now your children are going to be devoured by animals. The next one is the Egyptians also used to force the Jewish people to take care of large amounts of Egyptian babies. And it's regarding from nursing to watching to babysitting to entertaining, all areas. So now, because of that, measure for measure, it says you caused them hardship with your children. Now your children are going to be missing, gone, and who knows what from the wild animals. Additionally, the Egyptians instilled a significant amount of fear on the Jews. So now the animals instilled fear on the Egyptians. Next one is the Egyptians band together to torture the Jews. So now the animals bound together, they sort of united. You had animals that usually are diametrically opposed to each other. Animals that are against each other, that fight against each other. They united together to fight one common enemy, and that enemy was the Egyptians. The Egyptians would also snatch away Jewish children from their mothers. So now the Egyptian children were snatched away from the mothers of the Egyptians themselves. So everything went measure for measure. Rabbi Victor Miller also goes on and says that Hashem ordained orderliness in the world. That, animals in general would refuse to mate out of their species, out of their kind. Same animals will mate with the same animals. And even furthermore, there's a certain, cycle that God made it, that there are certain animals that will eat other species, and sort of protecting the world from basically an imbalance. Everything God created was a very, very, strong balance. And that's why you have certain places in the world. Israel, back at one point in time, there was a high population of a certain animal, so they infused a lot of cats into Israel. And then there's a lot of cats, whatever. So you have all this balance that people are trying to make. God created the world with a certain type of balance. What the Egyptians were trying to do is that they were trying to mix in with the Jewish nation. It says in Bamidbar, chapter 23, verse 9, it says that the Jewish nation, Hen Am Levadad Yishkon. The Jewish nation is a nation that dwells alone. We don't mix, we don't intermarry, we don't assimilate, we dwell alone. Israel is supposed to remain aloof, away from all alien influence. Because the Egyptians were causing the Jewish people to have kept enforced contacts with the Egyptians, they were refusing them to leave. This was a frustration of Hashem's plan of keeping the Jewish nation alone. So because they were keeping things that they weren't should be together, now God created things that shouldn't be together and went and attacked Paro. So as this plague was going on and it was getting very, very, very bad, Paro realized that it came to a point he was afraid to step into the open. And he realized he cannot continue to ignore Moshe and Aaron. So it's sort of like a relationship with a husband and wife. It comes to a point where the husband will realize that he's never going to win an argument. So Paro came to the realization that he's not winning over here. So he goes and he says, okay, let's call Moshe and Aaron to come and, let's try to resolve this plague. The problem was, how was he going to get the message to Moshe and Aaron? He didn't want to leave his palace. The animals were all over the place. Nobody wanted to go. So the way that they had to summon Moshe and Aaron is that they had to scream from one Egyptian to another, call Moshe, and it went until finally Moshe and Aaron got the message, and they came to Paro. Now, when Moshe and Aaron arrived to the throne room where Paro was, and Paro goes and says, it's amazing how these animals have gone through Goshen and they did not harm any of the Jews. So he says, I come to the realization that there is indeed a God of the Jews, and I have to deal with him. But Paro says that, what did you want? You wanted to take the Jewish nation, to go into the desert and sacrifice to your God, right? Moshe said, yes, that's what we want. So Paro says, and Moshe goes and says, we want to take a 3-day journey to go and sacrifice. So Paro says, I see over here your God is very powerful, and I respect him very much. But I see, at one point I thought that you could only serve your God in the desert, and that's why you wanted to travel to the desert to serve your God. But now I see over here that the environment of Egypt, the habitat of Egypt was constantly changing, meaning that you could stay right here and you can worship your God right here in Egypt. You don't have to go. You don't have to travel to the desert. He's not a God of just the desert. I thought he was a God of the desert. You could do it right here, right now. I give you full permission. Go ahead. Furthermore, Paul goes, and it says that your God seems like he's a God, his presence is everywhere. So you don't have to travel really anywhere in the world. Not 3 days, not 1 day, not 0 days, not even... If God is everywhere, your God is here. If your God is here, great concept, right? Paul says, your God is everywhere. Serve God right here. There's no need for you to leave Egypt. Full permission to sacrifice. So Moshe and Aaron go and say, listen, it's not practical. We can't do that. Your Egyptians, they worship animals. They do avodah zarah. They do idolatry, and they worship animals. We're going to go and we're going to start, slaughtering korbanot, sacrifices to our God by killing your. He says that's there's going to be an issue over here. Paro says no problem. I give you full permission. Don't worry about it. So Moshe goes, says, but at the same point in time, it's still disrespectful. It goes against our nature. That even though the Egyptians, by the way, this is something very important, even though the Egyptians deserve it, they deserve what they are going through, but it's something that if we're going to do it, even if you give us permission, the Egyptians are going to retaliate. When you deal with someone's God, it gets personal. Like when you talk about someone's mama, it gets personal. When you talk about someone's God, it gets personal over there. You could say whatever you want, Paul, from today until tomorrow, they're going to retaliate against us. We can't do it. Then Moshe Rabbeinu says, it says, Lo nachon la'asot ken, in Shemot chapter 8, verse 22, it says it's not proper to do this. It's not proper to go and be brazen right in front of all these Egyptians. The Mishnah Berurah, in the first Siman, says that the trait of azut, the trait of brazenness, is extremely loathsome. It's something it's very, very inappropriate. Even, says the Mishnah Berurah, says the Chafetz Chaim, even when you're serving it for God. The Chassam Sofer goes and explains that, the Chafetz Chaim goes and explains that what happens is that if you serve God out of brazenness, then this trait is going to acquire even in places where there is no brazen, where it's not the service of God. Meaning once you acquire a trait, it's going to cause that trait to spill out in other areas. So the Chassam Sofer goes and explains from an ethical standpoint, it's not befitting for us because we know the Egyptians are not going to be able to tolerate this. So we don't want to go and do this in front of the Egyptians, even in this case where we had the power over them. Meaning that even if we would say the Egyptians would not be able to retaliate against us, still it's not apropos, it's not right. Lo nachon la'asot ken, it's not right to do that. This is an important principle of service when we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that it's not about, we should not be antagonizing, we should not anger the non-Jewish people when we go and we serve God. We should not, show brazenness to a certain point. And that doesn't mean we're like, well, the non-Jew is going to get, insulted if I don't break Shabbat, so it must be I break Shabbat. No. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if here there's certain azut, there's certain brazenness when you act, that should not happen, and to the Gentiles. And this is why it's so important to have good midot, that the Chassam Sofer goes and explains that with regard to prophecy, we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was the highest level. But Aaron was elevated to a high level like Moshe Rabbeinu. Why? Because he was someone who was Ohev Shalom. He had such midot, that he was a lover of peace, that he made peace between a husband and wife, between friends. He brought people closer to the Torah. So because of this, because of his midot, the two of them were equal. And furthermore, it's such a great Kiddush Hashem when the nations of the world take note on the good midot, the good character traits of the Jewish people. The Ramban writes, the Nachmanides writes, that anyone that does business honestly and causes other people to be pleased with him is considered as if he had fulfilled the entire Torah. Midot is extremely, extremely important. Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky goes and says that to show how much it affects the Gentiles, he was in prison in Siberia. Now, being imprisoned in Siberia, if you want to use an example of being in one of like the worst prisons ever, you say somebody who was in prison in Siberia. It was of excruciating circumstances that they put people into. And in the same prison, there was two prestigious Polish government officials that were along with him. One of them was a justice minister, another one was the education minister. And they go over to Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky, and they say, he was a young man at the time, he says, we see over here that you have fine midot, you have good character traits, you have good judgment. He wanted them to arbitrate and argue. That they had an argument with each other, and they wanted him to resolve it. So what happened was, it turned out that the former education minister was accusing his friend, which was the justice minister, of stealing his pants. This is what the two high officials got. This is what they're arguing about. And it became very quickly clear that it was true. He did steal his pants. And the justice minister said he wanted to go and bribe the cook so that he would get a larger portion of soup. He says, what am I going to give? I don't have anything to give, so I gave his pants. And the Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky goes over and he says, and he starts rebuking the justice minister. He says, how could you? He says, you are the justice minister. You represent justice. How are you going and you're going against justice? He says, and he goes over to these two prisoners. He says, if you want to know how to behave, I want to share with you a story that happened when I was, during prison. He says, Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky would wake up in the morning and he would find herring and a cracker under his pillow every morning when he woke up, like a fish and a cracker under his pillow. Nowadays, you find a fish and a cracker under your pillow, you think someone's coming to kill you. But back then it was food, and they would do anything for food. So he says, I found a piece of herring, a piece of fish, and a cracker under my pillow. I'm like, what's going on over here? He said, at first I thought it was a practical joke. And I wanted to, it kept on happening, and I said, I wanted to see who is doing this, who is giving me this gift. So he decided that one night he's going to pretend to go to sleep, but he's going to really stay up. And he did not allow, at 3 a.m., he feels someone trying to pick up his pillow. So he jumps up, he looks around, and he says, aha! And he sees over there an 85-year-old man holding a cracker and a fish. And he goes over to the 85-year-old man and says, what are you doing? Why are you giving me this food? So the old man was shocked. He goes over to Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky. He says, listen, I used to be a very, very rich man. He says, and I learned that money is not worth anything. I cannot live on money. I need food over here. And, I realized that this food is no longer, at the stage that I am, is no longer going to make a difference for me. He says, I'm going to make do with the coarse bread that I have. But you are still a young man. If you will eat the herring and the cracker, this will strengthen your body. This will give you a greater chance of survival. So Rabbi Yaakov Galinsky goes over to these two ministers. And he says, you know how a person should behave from one friend to another? A friend should sacrifice for the sake of the other, not the reverse. The Jewish method is that you go and you have good midot. That's what we represent. Being a good Jew means that you have good midot. You can't claim to yourself to be a religious good Jew if you don't have good character traits. There was a certain Jew, when he was being loaded in the deportation train, going to Auschwitz. They were going to their death camps. They were going to concentration camps. He goes out to the window and he screams out to his neighbor who was standing over there. And he had a request. As he was being led away, you know what his request was? His request was to his neighbor. He says he has chickens in his backyard. He screams to his neighbor, please don't forget to feed the chickens. He says, why? Because I have a piece of bread that I want to eat. And I know there's an obligation that before, if you have pets, if you have animals, you can't eat before they eat. He says, because what a religious perspective says is that I go and I think about other people. Not only I think about other people, I think about other animals as well. And a person, they have some sort of animals, they can't eat until the animals are fed. This is what this person is thinking about as he's being traveled to the concentration camps. This is also how Chaim Palaji goes and writes that if this person has someone sick in the house, he should give food to the birds. Why? Because the birds will act as advocates in Shamayim for this person. Says Chaim Palaji, if the birds will act as advocates, if you're doing chesed with animals, certainly, if you do chesed with your friends and neighbors, they're going to work to your benefit. So what is going on over here? Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, we Jews, we have certain character traits. We can't start killing the animals that the Egyptians worship right in front of the Egyptians. It's not right of us. It's not our nature. Our nature of being good Jew is showing that we don't do that. We don't have that character trait. So Paro goes and says, very well. He says, I see what you're saying. I can't argue with that. He says, you know what? You could travel to the desert. But why do you got to travel 3 days? Travel 1 day. 1 day is more than enough. And there you could go on one condition, that you pray to your God to get rid of these wild animals. So Moshe left Paro's palace to a place that he was going to pray. And he prayed that they should be gone by tomorrow. But he also made sure that no more Egyptians should die after he left Paro's palace. Why? So Paro shouldn't claim that he didn't keep part of his bargain. That the deal was that he would have to pray that there would be no more death or destruction, and you waited till the next day, and then that's when it happened. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, since then, let there be no more death in Egypt from the wild animals. And indeed, that's what happened. The following day, all the wild beasts went away from Egypt. Not a single one remained. Think about, it's one thing, a miracle, that it all comes into, you have animals from the entire world coming into your area. But there's another miracle where they all leave. It's easy to bring in, it's easy to have guests, but when it's time for them to leave, not always do they want to leave. The tiger could be like, no, I'm kind of comfortable over here. Right? The crocodile says, no, I found my cousin Timothy over here in the thing over here. I'm going to go swim in the Nile. And it's very difficult. But what happened was, the second that the plague was over, they all instantly dispersed right back to where they came from. Not a single one remained. One of the reasons was that Hashem didn't want to have the animals die in Egypt, and then the Egyptians would benefit from the hides of the animals. This was a plague. The plague was meant to teach a lesson, and there's no benefit that's coming out of this. Meaning that all the animals went, right out of Egypt. Okay, the time is getting a little bit late. There's a little bit more to speak about this, and with Bezat Hashem, we'll have to continue with this. We'll put the end of this class together with the next one, just because of the time that's going on. That's late. But with that, we'll open up to any questions over here. Okay, and I want to thank also, there was another one for the Egyptian name Cleopatra. Thank you very much for that also. Cleopatra and Ramses and Kermit. Oh, it's Kermit the Frog. What did I say? Hermit the Frog? I am sorry. Okay. It's Kermit the Frog. Oh, look at that. Okay. See, we learn new things every single day. Baruch Hashem. We learned that, right? So it's Kermit the Frog. Okay, any questions?
Rabbi, no question, but I just appreciate the imagery of the tattooed bunny rabbit coming in at the side. I can completely picture it.
Good.
I'm going to be thinking about this on Pesach night. And, no question, but just a thank you.
Good, I appreciate that. And you should know that's what I try to do. And people always, when I speak to people, well, let's say sometimes some of them are speakers, and some speakers like to say, when they say a story, they like to only say a very, very short, which is true. It's good to say a short story. One of the reasons, especially stories that I make up, if I make up a story, I get very, very much into the detail. Why? Because you become part of that story, and you could learn from it more. It's not only, the story is not only to go and take the final lesson out of it, but if you're more involved in the story, then it becomes part of you. Like if you get to a point where you're reading a story, and then brings you to tears, and it brings you to laughter, and then there's a lesson after that. That lesson is so much more powerful than if it's just like, here's the information. So thank you for that. I did try to make it into a very, very more of a little bit on the graphic side on, a concept on this, but there was a reason. There was a reason for that, and I hope you guys were with me in the beginning part. I know it gets a little bit confusing in the beginning with the introduction. If you're not, I strongly recommend to look at the introduction class I gave. It was like a 45-minute class that I sort of summarized. Now it's something that's very, very. It gives you just like a broad understanding on it. But really, the main point of the class is really the makot, to try to understand and to get to a different level, to try to picture it. When you're coming to the Seder, you're coming in there with like, okay, I'm leaving Egypt. Let me see what happened. Let me learn the Midrashim. Let me hear what the Gemara says about it. Okay, here we have a question. For Pesach, to what extent should we go and sell our chametz or throw it all away? Does it really depend on the person? Example, single family, etc. So it depends on what is. So the question is what to do regarding chametz, to throw it away, to sell it. There's so many different levels of chametz over here. Generally speaking, if you have something that is, for example, like bread, that should be thrown away, burnt, and things like that. You have stuff that is in the middle, you go and you sell it, or depending on the situation is. If let's say you stocked up on so much, whatever, X, Y, and Z, and you don't want to get rid of it, then you sell it. Of course, you're allowed to sell, and you're allowed to sell the chametz, and you should sell the chametz in many, many circumstances. If there's a particular question on what should I do in a particular item, then I would suggest to speak to your local Orthodox rabbi on what to do on that particular thing. If someone has, I don't know, I don't even know what the example to use other than bread, cereal, whatever it is, you have a large amount of it, you could sell those things as well. But again, these are good things to ask. If when you're selling it, actually, it's a good thing to ask. People think that they have to go and destroy everything, and they just start dumping their whiskeys down the toilet and all that, or down their throats, depending on which type of person you are. So there's a reason you're allowed to sell it, and you should sell a lot of these things. But some things you should burn, and it depends on the particular situation, and that's you speak to your local Orthodox rabbi. Okay, any other questions, comments, concerns, confusions? Arguments? I think I'm pretty done now. All right, no, okay. All right, Chazak Baruch. Thank you all for joining.